In the Vatican Apostolic Archive, in the collection Registra Avenonensia, under number 54, on sheet 12 lies a parchment document, furnished with 13 wax seals attached to silk cords. This is the manifesto of the cardinals, issued on August 9, 1378, in the city of Anagni, which officially recorded the beginning of the Great Western Schism. This document is not merely a theological statement, but a detailed protocol of the institutional severing of an oath, where step by step it reconstructs the events of April 1378, when Bartolomeo Prignano, who took the name Urban VI, was elevated to the papal throne under pressure from an armed mob. This parchment served as the legal justification for creating a parallel church structure and unleashing a large-scale geopolitical confrontation that divided Europe for 39 years. Before we unfold this grand panorama of institutional crisis and analyze the secret mechanisms of governing a divided world, subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us develop the project, conduct in-depth work with archival collections, and produce precise historical investigations based exclusively on verified documents. The political anatomy of the 1378 crisis is rooted in the conclusion of the so-called Avignon papacy, when Pope Gregory XI returned the Holy See to Rome in 1377, finding the city in a state of complete economic and demographic decline. The social structure of Roman society at that time was characterized by a rigid confrontation between the old aristocracy, represented by the Orsini and Colonna clans, and the emerging municipal bourgeoisie, which sought to secure control over papal revenues for itself. The College of Cardinals, which arrived for the conclave after the death of Gregory XI in March 1378, consisted of 16 prelates, among whom 11 were French, divided into internal factions of Limousins and Gauls. 4 were Italians, and 1 was Spanish. The French majority aimed to elect a candidate loyal to them as quickly as possible and return the Curia to Avignon, where the administrative and tax system was fully protected by the French crown. The municipal authorities of Rome, realizing that another departure of the Pope would lead to the city's financial collapse, employed mechanisms of direct pressure, mobilizing over 5,000 armed townspeople who surrounded the Vatican Palace, demanding the election of a Roman, or at least an Italian. The mechanics of the conclave held on April 7, 1378, are recorded in the testimony of the papal notary Stephen of Piacenza. According to his reports, the isolation of the electors was broken within the first hours. The crowd broke through the floor under the meeting hall and hammered stakes into the doors, threatening the physical suppression of the entire college in the event of a Frenchman's election. Under conditions of time pressure and escalating panic, the cardinals resorted to a tactical compromise, electing the Archbishop of Bari, Bartolomeo Prignano, who was not a member of the college and was considered an experienced administrator capable of satisfying both sides. However, when on April 8th the crowd breached the palace's outer defensive perimeters, the cardinals, fearing that news of the election of a non-Roman would lead to the immediate loss of life for the conclave participants, resorted to direct falsification. They dressed the elderly Roman Cardinal Francesco Tibaldeschi in papal robes, seated him on the throne, and forced him to accept signs of homage, while the electors themselves secretly left the Vatican through underground passages, taking refuge in Castel Sant'Angelo and fortified estates outside the city walls. The official enthronement of Prignano as Urban VI did not diffuse the situation but merely shifted the conflict into a phase of administrative confrontation. The protocols of the Curia's sessions from May 1378 show that the new pontiff immediately attempted to dismantle the cardinals' financial monopoly, accusing them of simony and the illegal appropriation of church tithes. Urban VI publicly declared his intention to appoint 29 new Italian cardinals, which would have completely eliminated French dominance in the consistory. Realizing the threat of losing control over appointments and benefices, the French cardinals, under the pretext of the summer heat, left Rome and concentrated in Anagni, forming an alternative power center there. They received financial and military support from Count Onorato Gaetani, who provided the conspirators with 20,000 gold florins and stationed mercenary troops under the command of Bernardon de la Salle on his estates, ensuring the safety of holding alternative elections in the city of Fondi. There, on September 20, 1378, the cardinals elected Robert of Geneva as pope, who took the name Clement VII. From this moment, a total replication of the Catholic Church's institutions began, transforming the schism into a stable international system. The geopolitical division of Europe occurred not along religious, but along strictly economic and military political lines. Clement VII, who settled in Avignon in 1379, was supported by France, Scotland, Castile, and Aragon, for whom the Avignon administration was a convenient tool for financial control over the local clergy. Urban VI was recognized by England, the Holy Roman Empire, Hungary, Poland, and most of northern Italy, who saw in the Roman pontiff a counterweight to French hegemony within the ongoing 100 Years' War. Each curia created its own staff of officials, duplicating the apostolic chamber, the chancery, the tribunal of the rota, and the sacred penitentiary. This led to a situation where two appointees, each possessing legally legitimate documents sealed with authentic seals, laid claim to the same ecclesiastical office in dioceses. The financial flows of Urban VI's Roman Curia were in critical condition due to the loss of control over revenues from France and the Iberian Peninsula. The diplomatic correspondence of the Roman Chamber from 1381 to 1385 demonstrates that to finance military campaigns against Queen Joanna I of Naples, who supported Avignon, Urban VI resorted to unprecedented measures. He sanctioned the pledging of church property, including the golden reliquaries of Roman basilicas, and imposed an emergency tax on the clergy of England and Germany, amounting to 10% of their annual income. Roman tax collectors used debt obligations from Florentine and Venetian merchant houses to transfer funds through a system of bills of exchange. However, the high risks of interception meant that no more than 40% of the collected sums reached Rome. The rest was absorbed by mercenary troops and bankers' commissions. Meanwhile, the Avignon Curia of Clement VII operated a much more refined fiscal apparatus, inherited from the era of John XXII. According to the cash books of Avignon for 1380 to 1390, the main sources of income became annates, payments of the first year's income from any newly appointed benefice, as well as revenues from vacant positions and fees for issuing papal dispensations and privileges. The Avignon Apostolic Chamber created an extensive network of regional collectors who acted as both financial agents and intelligence officers simultaneously. They meticulously recorded the economic potential of each parish in special registers known as ration books, which minimized the concealment of income by local bishops. In exchange for the loyalty of Clement VII, the French crown obtained the right to control the distribution of major church offices within the kingdom, effectively turning the Avignon throne into its financial appendage. The logistics of governance and the transmission of confidential information under the Schism required the development of fundamentally new security systems. The movement of papal nuncios and couriers, known as cursors, occurred through the territories of hostile states, where possessing a document from the opposing pope meant immediate arrest, confiscation of property, or physical suppression. To protect correspondence, both chanceries began to widely implement cryptographic methods. The Register of Ciphers of the Avignon Curia from 1389 contains instructions on the use of monoalphabetic substitution systems with the introduction of nulls, symbols without semantic meaning, intended to disorient the enemy's codebreakers. In letters sent to cardinals in Germany, vowel sounds were replaced by combinations of consonants or special graphic signs, and key political figures were encrypted with biblical or mythological names. Couriers traveled under the guise of pilgrims, merchants, or mendicant monks, sewing parchments into the lining of their clothes or hiding them in hollow staffs. The systematic violation of safe conduct passes issued by secular rulers led to each diplomatic mission being planned as a full-scale special operation with redundant routes through the Swiss Alps or by sea from Marseille to Genoa. Attempts to overcome the schism through bilateral diplomacy over 30 years yielded no results due to both sides' unwillingness to cede power. Considerations of the possibility of voluntary abdication, known in canon law as the via cessationis, completely failed during the preparations for a meeting between the Roman Pope Gregory XII and the Avignon Pontiff Benedict XIII in 1407 to 1408. Diplomatic memoranda record that negotiations over the meeting place in Savona turned into protracted sabotage. Gregory XII, under pressure from his main creditor, King Ladislaus of Naples, refused to travel by sea, fearing capture by Avignon galleys, while Benedict XIII refused to advance inland, citing a lack of security guarantees from Italian condottieri. The Curias deliberately created logistical obstacles, putting forward impossible demands regarding the composition of the personal guard and the radius of the demilitarized zone around the negotiation site. In the end, the pontiffs stopped 15 kilometers apart, engaging in futile correspondence, which led to the complete disillusionment of their own cardinals, who realized that the institutional survival of both curias had become a higher priority for their leaders than the unity of the Church. A critical audit of this impasse compelled the cardinals of both obediences to take an unprecedented step, uniting without the sanction of the pontiffs. In May 1408, 7 cardinals of Gregory XII fled from Lucca and met with representatives of Benedict XIII in Livorno, where they concluded an agreement to convene an ecumenical council to overcome the schism. The legal basis for this was the corporate theory of the Church, developed by the canonists Francesco Zabarella and Jean Gerson, which asserted that in the event of a prolonged schism, supreme authority passes to the College of Cardinals or an assembly of bishops. At the Council of Pisa in 1409, attended by delegates from 15 nations, both reigning popes were declared schismatics, heretics, and Simonists, after which the council proclaimed their deposition. The new unified pontiff was elected Pietro Filargo as Alexander V, who soon after his death in 1410 was succeeded by Baldassare Cossa, who took the name John XXIII. However, since neither Gregory XII nor Benedict XIII recognized the council's verdict, instead of eliminating the schism, it escalated. A situation of triple papacy arose in Europe. with three parallel administrative systems waging a war for taxes and geopolitical recognition. The analysis of sources narrating this stage of the schism requires rigorous critical evaluation, as the majority of documents were created in conditions of acute political struggle and bear the character of direct propaganda commissions. The primary narrative source against the Pisan Pope John XXIII is the Chronicle of Dietrich of Neheim, On the Schism, where Cossa is described as a former pirate, usurper, and organizer of the physical suppression of his predecessor Alexander V through poisoning, carried out by the physician Daniel of Santa Sofia. However, a comparison of this data with the financial accounts of the Bolognese diocese, where Cossa served as legate for a long time, shows that he was, first and foremost, a highly effective military logistician and administrator, who managed to stabilize the income of the Papal States in central Italy. The indictment of 70 articles compiled against him at the Council of Constance in 1415 contains numerous contradictory witness testimonies obtained under direct pressure from the investigative commission formed by supporters of the German Emperor Sigismund I. The accusations of mass murder, incest, and piracy bore the character of a legal elimination of a political opponent, since John XXIII possessed powerful financial backing from the Florentine Medici bankers and represented a real threat to Sigismund's plans to subordinate church authority to imperial control. Similarly, documents concerning the Avignon line in the person of Benedict XIII, Pedro de Luna, should be evaluated. In the royal ordinances of the French King Charles VI in 1398 and 1406, proclaiming subtraction, the cessation of payment of church taxes to Avignon, and the seizure of the right of appointment to benefices in favor of the crown, Benedict XIII was accused of obstinacy in the schism, magic, and aiding heretics. These accusations were propagated by the theological faculty of the Sorbonne. A historical legal analysis of these acts shows that behind the theological rhetoric lay the desire of the French aristocracy, led by the Duke of Orléans, to keep financial resources within the country for waging war against England, preventing their outflow to the Curia, which by that time had begun to demonstrate independence from Paris. Conversely, testimonies from witnesses within Pedro de Luna's pro-Spanish circle, recorded in the archive of the Peñascola Castle, depict him as the sole legitimate guardian of canon law, who strictly followed the procedures established before 1378. These contradictions vividly demonstrate that, under crisis conditions, legal norms were used by all sides exclusively as tools of political compromise. The final overcoming of the schism became possible only due to a shift in the balance of power and the transfer of initiative to secular authority in the person of Emperor Sigismund I, who forced John XXIII to convene the Council of Constance in 1414. The logistics of conducting this grand congress, which lasted until 1418, represent a unique example of medieval administrative planning. To the city of Constance, whose permanent population was about 6,000 people, over 70,000 participants arrived simultaneously, including curial officials, bishops, ambassadors, knights, and their servants. Municipal authorities introduced strict price controls on food, fodder, and housing rentals recorded in the city books of Constance to prevent speculation. To ensure security, special international patrols were formed, and entry into the city was controlled by passes. The council's funding was provided through targeted subsidies from imperial cities and emergency levies on the German clergy. The main technical innovation that predetermined the success of the council and the downfall of John XXIII was the change in the voting regulations. Realizing that John XXIII had brought with him over 80 loyal Italian bishops who possessed numerical superiority, the council's commission, at the insistence of the delegations from England, France, and Germany, altered the procedure. Voting was changed from a per capita basis to a principle of voting by nations. 5 nations were formed: the Italian, French, German, English, and Spanish, each of which had exactly one collective vote, formed during internal closed sessions. This completely negated the numerical advantage of the Italian Curia. Understanding that he had lost control of the process and would inevitably be condemned for simony, John XXIII, on the night of March 20th, 1415, secretly fled from Constance, disguised as a postman, hoping that his absence would deprive the council of its legitimacy and lead to its dissolution. However, the council responded by issuing the radical decree Haec Sancta on April 5, 1415, which established the priority of an ecumenical council over papal authority in matters of faith and overcoming the schism. John XXIII was declared deposed, intercepted by the troops of the Margrave of Brandenburg, and placed under arrest. This was followed by the liquidation of the remaining centers of the schism. The Roman Pope Gregory XII, assessing the futility of further resistance, demonstrated political flexibility. On July 4, 1415, his plenipotentiary, Carlo Malatesta, read before the council the act of official recognition of the council and the simultaneous voluntary abdication of Gregory from the throne, which allowed him to retain his cardinal rank and live out his life in peace. The most stubborn resistance was offered by the Avignon Pope Benedict XIII, who barricaded himself in the impregnable fortress of Peñíscola on the coast of Valencia, supported only by a handful of followers. Despite his personal protests and his daily issuance of anathemas against the rest of the world, the council declared his final deposition as an irredeemable schismatic on July 26, 1417. The Spanish kingdoms, realizing the inevitability of international isolation, withdrew their support, leaving Benedict in complete political autonomy, which ceased to exist with his death in 1423. The documentary epilogue of the Great Western Schism is recorded in the extensive liquidation acts of the Council of Constance. The archives of the Apostolic Chamber of the Pisan Curia were completely confiscated. According to an inventory from 1416, compiled by imperial commissioners, 143,000 gold florins in cash were seized from Baldassar Cosa, as well as 42 chests of silverware, precious stones, and unique manuscripts, some of which were transferred to the University of Heidelberg, while the remaining funds were used to cover Emperor Sigismund's debts to the city of Constance for providing logistics for the council. The property of the Avignon Chancery was partially sealed and remained in Avignon until 1790, when it was transported to Paris and the Vatican. The schism had a tectonic influence on the European legal system. The decrees Haec Sancta and Frequens laid the foundation for the theory of conciliarism, limiting the absolute monarchy of the Roman pontiffs and obliging them to convene councils regularly. This created a precedent for the collective diplomatic resolution of interstate and religious crises, effectively anticipating the structure of international congresses of the modern era. The tax appetites of Rome were temporarily limited by the national concordats of 1418, concluded with France, Germany, and England, which weakened the centralized fiscal control of the Curia and gave a powerful impetus to the formation of sovereign nation-states. The schism officially ended on November 11, 1417, when an expanded college of electors, consisting of 23 cardinals and 30 representatives from the council nations, elected a single pope, Oddone Colonna, who took the name Martin V.